first of all, just ground rules here. So I am going to talk through some ideas about our OHDSI Evidence Network, which I will assert should be a priority for our entire community. And this is primarily going to be a kickoff to the work that Claire has been discussing and that Claire and Paul will continue next week, and that others you'll hear over the next couple months. While I am going to make a argument for why you need to do this now, I also would like for this to be an open discussion. So I do have the chat open. If you have questions and you want to chat along the way, feel free to do that. If you want to raise your hand, I'll also be able to at least see that, and Craig can call on you if you want to stop me. So I'd like for this to be a discussion. We've got about 50 minutes here, and what I'd like to do is really try to motivate what it is, the kind of history of why we need to generate an evidence network, but also concretely for all of you who have access to data, what's in it for you as it relates to participating in the evidence network, not just in terms of you having the chance to participate in global network studies that can impact the lives of millions of patients around the world, which should be a good incentive, but also just much more narrowly in terms of meeting your own local needs, which we think that we can do in a win-win situation here. So I'm going to start here with OHDSI's mission. Our mission is to improve health by empowering a community to collaboratively generate the evidence that promotes better health decisions and better care. When we talk about the OHDSI Evidence Network, what I want to be clear about is that this really is central to what we're trying to do as a community. So if you're here, if you've been attending or lurking on these calls, if you participate in any way in OHDSI, it should be because in some way that you think that there's some interest in collaborating together to generate evidence. And the only way that we're going to actually be able to do that is if we formalize the ways that we collaborate and formalize the ways that we can generate evidence together. And we've learned a lot along the journey of the last 10 years about how to do this. And we're at a natural inflection point right now as it relates to needing to mature our evidence network to meet the needs that our community has an opportunity to deliver. So we've shown this slide several times that George published a few years back about the ways in which we collaborate. We collaborate on open community data standards, on open source development, on methods research, on clinical evidence generation. We talk about the fact that we have a distributed data network where anybody in the world who has access to patient-level data has the opportunity to standardize their data to the OMOP Common Data Model and apply open source tools to their data, such that we can run OHDSI network studies, whereby any researcher in our community can specify some sort of research question, offer up an analysis implementation of that question. Any data site around the world can participate in executing that code, sharing back only aggregate summary results so that collaboratively we can interpret those results and disseminate the evidence. And this has been the rubric that we've been following to do the work that we've done for quite some years and to quite a bit of success. For all of you on the call, there should be some place that you see yourself on this picture, whether it be you're thinking about how we evolve the data standards, you're thinking about contributing open source code, you're thinking about doing methodologic research, maybe you have a clinical question that you want answered, maybe you're here because you have access to data, maybe you're here because you're interested in disseminating evidence. All of these are places where we need members of the community to be and to contribute to make this community mission possible. But what we're really going to be talking about today specifically is the left-hand side of this screen. How do we actually formalize this idea that there is an OHDSI evidence network comprised of data sources whereby organizations who have converted their data to the OMOP Common Data Model and express a willingness and at least the opportunity, if they're interested and they have the resource and the time, to participate in some of these network studies that come through. And my reflection over our progress over the last decade is that we've done some really great work as a community to demonstrate that this process can work. And we've had some highlights and successes to demonstrate when it did work. But we're still not actually at the point where this picture is a well-oiled machine. Rather, it's more of an ideal world we'd like to be in. And so I want to take a few minutes to celebrate some of the successes that we've had, but also um, so that we don't just stroke our ego too much. Also highlight some of the challenges that is still in front of us in terms of why we need to formalize this process further. So to start, I'm going to highlight that we as a community have thousands of researchers across the world that are participating in some sort of way. And the scale of that's very impressive because we could ask ourselves, what could we do if we had thousands of researchers working together to solve important problems? We could either have thousands of people working on a shared problem and probably do a better job on that one problem than anybody else in the world, or we can think about how to effectively divide and conquer to solve multiple problems. But ultimately, thousands of people represents both a tremendous opportunity and also a challenge of figuring out how to foster collaborations. One of my reflections about our community is that, and I'll do credit to Craig. I think Craig does an amazing job of trying to communicate the progress of our community through this community call, through the newsletters, through our annual reports. I think that the community tries its best to communicate peer-to-peer with each other. And yet the overwhelming thing that I hear, probably more than anything else about OHDSI, is how do I become aware of what's going on? It's this lack of awareness of what the opportunities are, where the collaborations are. I've spent a lot of my time trying to connect people, and I realize that that's extremely inefficient. And I'm just not very good at it, to be blunt, because we've got a challenge where we've got thousands of researchers around the world that all want to contribute in some way to deliver this mission. And yet it's really hard to figure out how do we connect thousands of people together towards a common vision. Now, we at least have one thing that we've agreed on at this juncture, which is a standardized data model. The OMOP Common Data Model provides us a lens for thinking about how data can be standardized into a common structure and format. And we at least have this as kind of like a common foundation to build on. In our Journey book last year, we had summarized the data network at present to comprise 534 data sources in 49 countries. And we're, should be proud of the fact that that collectively represents over 950 million patient records, which is like 12% of the world's population. Now, I think that we should be extremely excited about the potential of what this data network could represent, but also consider this to be an obligation that if we've put the effort to put ourselves in this position to steward this amount of data, then we really need to be able to capitalize on this data to deliver the maximum value back to patients whose data that it represents. And while I think we can be excited about these staggering numbers representing the world's largest data network, we also should probably be sobered by the fact that we currently are using an extremely small fraction of this data network to answer most research questions that we have. I'll go through a couple case in points to celebrate the work we're doing and also just showcase the current challenge we have. So our largest published OHDSI Evidence Network study to date, Erica Voss led. This was published in eClinical Medicine back last year, actually. And this was a paper where we contextualize adverse events of special interests for 24 million patients with COVID-19 across 26 databases. And as Erica and the team had summarized, this included data from administrative claims, electronic health record data, registry, GP data sources, and comprised 11 countries in North America, Europe, and the Asia Pacific regions. And so this is a great demonstration of what's possible, and we should actively look at these projects and celebrate them as with this answered a specific question, motivated in this particular case as a follow-on to concerns of safety of the COVID-19 vaccine. So certainly important and salient and valuable for the broader world. And yet we should also take stock that while Erica's study is the largest we've ever done, and we should be very proud of that. 26 databases out of 534 databases represents 5% of the OHDSI network that is claimed that organizations have adopted the OMOP common data model. So we could say the glass is 5% full, or we could say that it's 95% empty. In that Erica's study represents the largest study that we've ever done, and yet still 95% of organizations who have standardized their data, the OMOP common data model, did not contribute to this opportunity. And I think it raises a legitimate question about what are the barriers to entry to participate in this. Certainly, time and resources can be a challenge. Maybe a given organization did not have the resources internally to be able to download the standardized analysis package that Erica created, to run it, to share back results. So that certainly probably reflects some of it. Maybe some organizations were still on their journey to standardizing their data and felt like they hadn't yet gotten to the point where their data was of sufficient quality to participate. So they made their own judgment call to not participate. I'm sure that's some of it. But I would contend that the 95% problem we had for Erica's tremendous 5% success isn't actually about active willingness to not participate or not engage, but it's actually an issue of lack of awareness. I think that most of the data partners across the OHDSI network were not aware of the opportunity, did not know how they could engage and participate in this study, and didn't feel sufficiently empowered to just be able to speak up and say, hey, I'd like to participate, without the full recognition that all it would have taken for any data partner was to raise their hand, and a whole bunch of people from within our community would have swooped in to help that site to be able to be an active and equal partner alongside these other 5% of our data partners who did participate. So I think this is a good study that we should continue to celebrate as an example, but I also think it's a great example of how much opportunity still sits in front of us that motivates our OHDSI Evidence Network. Now, in part due to this and other network studies that had even far fewer studies, Claire discussed the OHDSI Evidence Network last year during our Save Our Sisyphus Challenge, where we motivated the idea that if data sources could just sign up and contribute a minimum set of metadata about their sources, they could become aware of network studies as they were going on. They could be assessed for fitness of use, and they could have a direct mechanism to engage between researchers that had important clinical questions that needed data and data sources that had useful, valuable information, and be able to create a connection between those organizations. In our sprint last year, Claire did a wonderful job of wrangling our initiation of the OHDSI Evidence Network and identified 34 data partners who were willing to volunteer to be just on a list. I think 34 data partners is a great start. 34 data partners out of 534 means that we still had 500 data sources who did not actually sign up to participate. So 500 organizations with access to data, standardized the common data model, who weren't yet in the position to sign up. Now, maybe they had reasons for not signing up. Maybe they still were intimidated by the idea of just raising their hand and saying that they had source information that they wanted to participate. Maybe they had some technical problems with running the short script that Claire provided that would allow them to summarize metadata. But I would actually contend that our biggest problem was still lack of awareness of how to get engaged, how to know how to connect individuals to be able to sign up and participate so that they could be part of this. And while 34 data sources as part of the evidence network was a great start, 500 data sources missing suggests that we're still barely scratching the surface and the potential of where we need to go here. But yet, with 34 data partners, we already saw a huge success. As Cindy presented only a couple weeks ago, our SOS challenge, our first of our SOS challenge studies that has been published, has already been released with an important clinical response. Cindy Kai led this study that was published in Ophthalmology Retina that looked at the risk of kidney failure among patients with blinding diseases who received these various anti-VEGF treatments. And in this study, Cindy highlighted that she used 12 data sources, which included both administrative claims and electronic health record data. Now, 12 data sources in the ophthalmology space is far and away the largest international study that's been done in a question like this. And so we have a lot to be proud of. At the same time, 12 out of 34 data sources is only 35%, meaning 65% of our evidence network did not contribute to Cindy's study. So now raises the question, why is it that the majority of data sources that participated in the OHDSI Evidence Network didn't participate in Cindy's study? And here, I'm going to present the second big problem that we actually have, which is just because an organization has a willingness to participate doesn't mean that their data is fit for use. And in fact, one of the big challenges that we have is how to define a question and figure out which data sources have the right elements to be able to connect to that data source. Or conversely, how do we figure out what data sources have so that we can figure out which questions we can viably answer? And in the case of our SOS challenge, we had the opportunity to demonstrate the success of data diagnostics as an explicit tool that uses the metadata from the OHDSI Evidence Network to be able to answer this question. So we actually knew across the 34 data sources as part of the OHDSI Evidence Network which ones were going to be viable for Cindy's study and which ones were not. And while some organizations may not have the time and resources to participate or may opt out for other reasons, actually the majority of the reasons for the sites who didn't participate was completely understandable because their data sources didn't have anti-VEGF treatments or didn't actually have adequate capture of kidney failure or the blinding indications that were necessary for doing the study, or didn't have sufficient longitudinality. These are very good scientific, valid reasons for a data source to not participate, because ultimately, if we're trying to generate reliable evidence, that has to mean that we're working with data that are fit for use. And so I would actually consider the fact that only a minority of our data sources in our evidence network participated was actually a sign of success in this particular case, because actually a majority of the data sources that were fit for use did participate and engage and contribute to an important clinical question. So I think that this is a success, except for the 500 data sources that are sitting on the sideline and who are not in our list. So I'll provide one other vignette that's been ongoing here, which is the Eden Consortium, which many of you have heard quite a lot about. At present time, the Eden project has 193 data sources in 30 countries. And Monsi's been doing a wonderful job of coordinating this data network as part of the Eden project. Now, if we think about just Europe as a whole, this actually represents over a third of the OMOP CDM adopters across the OHDSI community and over 60% of our countries. And I see some friendly faces from the Eden community that are on the call today representing Europe. Hi, Miguel. And we're actually in a situation where now within Eden, because this standardized data network has been established, we can start to think about harnessing the power of 193 data sources. Eden's done a couple things that I want to showcase just to make sure that everybody is fully aware and participating here. So one is the Eden portal. For those who are not familiar, this is a public resource. You can sign up to get a username and password. And when you log into the Eden portal, you're able to go to a dashboard that allows you to explore the 193 data sources that are available. It allows you to read about extrinsic metadata, so set of questions that the data partner organizations have filled in to describe their data, as well as intrinsic metadata, which is basically summary statistics computed by the data source that can be explored. This is a resource that the Eden project created, which has proven to be quite valuable and somewhat, or I'd say substantially differentiated from other data cataloging efforts, because it's actually trying to make use of data to answer a basic question: which data sources are fit for use for my research question? And I think as part of the Eden project, we've learned quite a lot about how to make use of this intrinsic and extrinsic metadata. And we're working hard as we're finishing up the OHDSI Eden project to think more critically about how lessons learned from Eden can be brought into OHDSI and other broader communities. So it's exciting that there exists a website you all have access to at portal.eden.edu or EU. You can log in, you can explore these data sources, and I encourage you to do that, to be able to see these data sources and explore their potential. We still have a challenge, though, within Eden, which is that even if you found that 193 data sources sound super sexy and exciting and you want to do all sorts of research, how do you determine that an individual source is available for actually, Nikolai just posted it. Contact information would be great. Thank you, Nikolai. You just lined it straight up perfectly. So what this data catalog tells you is that there exists a data source somewhere in the world, it even tells you the country, where there might be intriguing information. But what doesn't exist currently is the ability to make a connection, to be able to say, here's my research question, here's what I need to answer my research question, to determine whether or not a data source is fit for use, and to make that explicit connection between the researcher with a valid question that has been proven to be feasible in a given source, and the data holder who may want to be able to participate. Christoph, you just have to be able to click to, when you log in, there's a place to create a new account if you don't already have one. And Eden, oh, why does the Eden portal not accept the Eden Academy login? That's actually a fair question. I actually thought it was the same, but I might just have the same username and password for those two registered accounts. Erica says no. Erica's shaking her head for some other reason.
No, they're different accounts.
Yeah, they are just different username and passwords.
Yeah, they're different systems.
Yeah, thank you. So you can create an account, and I encourage you to take a look. In fact, I'll just flip over just so you can see it live, just to understand basically how it works. So once you log into the Eden portal, there is a data catalog, and you can scroll through and browse the hundreds of data sources that are available. And there's also a dashboard that allows you to be able to summarize the totality of the data network and to be able to say, like, well, I'm interested specifically in data in a particular country or a particular, I want to explore a specific data source. And there's a collection of summary information about demographics, data domains, data provenance, even a concept browser that allows you to get some initial understanding of data. But what this tool explicitly does not solve is, how do we make connections between individuals and organizations and the research questions that matter with the data sources who want to participate. And Claire and Paul have been doing a good job of having conversations within our OHDSI Evidence Network work group to discuss the tension here. There are some source data partners who want to be able to be engaged with as many researchers as possible. And in fact, many of them see that as pretty lucrative business opportunities from the perspective of getting engaged in doing research, whether that be funded or not, as a way to facilitate activities. Some folks do not want to be burdened by having lots of people pinging them and just having their email on some public website that just says, contact me every time, because Miguel's phone would be running off the hook every time, given the tremendous resource that they have in Spain. And so we have to create a mechanism for participation that allows us to rightly connect the right researchers with the right questions to the right data sources in an appropriate way. And that's what Claire and Paul have been trying to work through, is exactly how we're going to do this. But nonetheless, given that we have hundreds of data sources, if we could get data sources that could raise their hand and say, I'm willing to participate in the OHDSI Evidence Network, then there's the possibility that we can extend even further beyond what's already been successfully accomplished in the Eden portal to provide that mechanism for connection. Now, despite the fact that Eden's been super successful, and I'm extremely proud of everything that the Eden group has done, I'll also highlight the glass portion empty. At the OHDSI Europe Symposium earlier this year, Marta and Teresa provided a very nice presentation of the largest study to date that will be coming out of the Eden project. And this was a study that's focused on trends of drugs with suggested shortages in Europe. The idea of this study is to be able to study the incidence and prevalence of medications that have had the potential to have drug shortages across Europe. And the idea was to be able to provide this descriptive characterization to understand when there was concerns of shortage, did we see decreases in use? Did we see increases in alternative treatments? And to be able to do that kind of structurally at a systematic basis. And so remembering that there were 193 data partners in Eden, there was a call to 193 data partners across Eden to participate in this one big study that we even affectionately were referring to in Eden as the mega study, because we wanted this to be the biggest possible study imaginable. And what Marta presented at the Europe Symposium last month was that of the 193 data sources, we got 72 of them to express interest, 49 of them to send results, 47 of them passed the minimum viable diagnostics to contribute results. Now, this study's still ongoing, and I think we should absolutely celebrate the fact that, except for Erica, everybody should be super proud of the fact that there's going to be a new OHDSI study that's even bigger and better than before with 47 data sources, and only Erica, who does not like drug shortages, is going to be disappointed by this. But for the rest of us, we should be super proud and excited about the fact that within the Eden Project, such a large-scale study on such an important problem is going to be answered. So that's awesome. And yet, 47 data sources out of 193 data sources is 24%. That means 76% of the Eden data partners are not participating in this study. Now, possibly some of those organizations didn't have the time or interest and resources. Possibly some of those sites, really just they just knew that they, for whatever reason, didn't have drug information, could participate. Possibly some of them felt like their data wasn't of sufficient quality. But I would actually contend that even still, in this case where we had a funded project, where sites were paid to put their data into this Eden catalog, and strongly encouraged to engage in the study, the idea that 3/4 of the sites didn't participate represents the fundamental problem that we actually have within the OHDSI community, which is that we have to figure out ways to engage the collective research and enterprise so that we make it really easy to participate, that the resource effort to conduct a study is seen and is extremely a small lift, and that the value that comes back from participating clearly outweighs any perceived costs associated with participating. And so I think we have lots of these examples to be able to celebrate, and yet we're still quite far behind in terms of where we need to be if we fancy ourselves to think about OHDSI as a global community with 534 data partners adopting the OMOP Common Data Model. Then the questions about what we can answer and how do we actually successfully work and collaborate together is the big problem that we need to be able to tackle together. All right. So all of that's in the history. So now I want to talk about what happened just this week. And if I haven't motivated you sufficiently to think about problem, I'm going to hope that I can motivate you a little bit further on something more temporal. And I see that Michelle and Cindy are on. And so I'm going to ask you ladies to chime in if I misrepresent or butcher this story, which I'm certainly probably will. But while some of you were enjoying your 4th of July holidays in the U.S., there were other people who were having a less fun time because there was a lot of scurrying about, because there was a paper published on July 3rd in the journal JAMA Ophthalmology, one of the top ophthalmology journals, suggesting entitled "Risk of Non-Arteritic Anterior Ischemic Optic Neuropathy in Patients Prescribed Semaglutide." And so this was a paper that was published from authors at Harvard. They described that anecdotal experience raised the possibility that semaglutide, which is a GLP-1 with rapidly increased use, is associated with NION. And the objective was to investigate whether there is an association between semaglutide and the risk of NION. They conducted an observational study in their own local registry of neuro-ophthalmologist data at one academic institution, taking the data from 2017 to 2023, looking for the ICD-10 code H47.01 to find ischemic optic neuropathy cases. They then matched those patients who were prescribed semaglutide to patients who had type 2 diabetes but prescribed other non-GLP-1 drugs. And they conducted a Kaplan-Meier analysis to estimate the effect. And what they observed is that while they had this one registry of ophthalmology clinic data, which comprised of 16,000 patients, they had 700 with type 2 diabetes, 194 of those were prescribed semaglutide, and of those, we had 17 cases of NION amongst those patients who prescribed semaglutide. Their statistical analysis revealed that this produced an association metric with a hazard ratio of 7.6, and they claim statistical significance. However, their conclusion is that this study findings suggest an association between semaglutide and NION, and as this is an observational study, future study is required to assess causality, which is the beautiful cookie cutter way of an epidemiologist waving their hands to say, don't really trust this anyway. So what could the world do on July 3rd last week? Well, we could have just said, well, yep, it's just another small observational study in a single source, so I guess we should probably not do anything with it. Or we could have said, okay, how are we going to get together some credible data so we could actually answer this question legitimately? Because they did say, after all, future studies required. Or what we could do is we could go get this all over the mainstream media. The BBC reports that the study links weight loss drug to the rare eye condition. The Guardian says that the weight loss jabs may be linked with a condition that causes blindness, and that people with diabetes on semaglutide found in Wegovy and Ozempic are 4 times more likely to be diagnosed with a disease of optic nerve. CNN talked about how popular weight loss and diabetes drugs are increased risk of a rare form of blindness. Forbes talked about how using Ozempic and Wegovy could raise the risk of a rare form of blindness. USA Today picked this up and started running with how this is linked to a rare condition that can cause blindness. And the following day, July 4th, when some of us should have been shooting off fireworks, I guess Novo Nordisk is primarily in Denmark anyway, but they had to spend their time shrugging off concerns that a study linking weight loss drugs to this rare eye condition, but specifically, their spokesperson had to say that this study has key methodologic limitations. And this article in CNN is actually talking about the economic considerations of how this study potentially can impact not only utilization of the drug, but also the stock price of the company that's manufacturing the product. All based off of this one observational study that's published on July 3rd last week. Now, when a study comes out and says future research is required, the thing that's very disheartening is that very rarely does future research actually get done, even though it's said it's required. And yet here we sit in this situation where we as an OHDSI community could potentially be considering how to answer this question. So what are the things that we've got? We know how to standardize questions to frame this problem. We know that the questions here center on characterization to actually properly quantify the incidence of this rare condition amongst an exposed population. We know how to standardize questions around estimation for safety surveillance and comparative effectiveness research. We also know how to standardize prediction questions to try to anticipate which patients are at most risk of experiencing this adverse event associated if it's real. We already have standardized analysis tools to conduct proper causal assessment. And as Cindy's study in the SOS challenge demonstrates, we can apply the strategist framework, use our Hades packages, and be able to run this analysis relatively efficiently. What we need is to have standardized data from the OHDSI Evidence Network, and we need that for 2 reasons. One is we need to be able to produce generalizable phenotypes that would allow for us to have a consistent and reproducible execution across the network. And two, we need enough data sources so that we can find the subset that are fit for purpose for this question. Those are the data sources that actually have sufficient exposure, outcome, and longitudinal follow-up. And then the last thing we need is we actually just need the collective will of our community to want to collaborate to generate the evidence that promotes better health decisions and better care. Now, our eye care and vision research work group, they will be discussing this specific study opportunity on their upcoming work group call, which is this coming Thursday, July 11th at 6 p.m. Eastern time. So I encourage you to join Michelle in the group to discuss this. But the challenge that I actually see is that when a study like this comes out on July 3rd, and the call is made for future research is needed, the typical cadence that we oftentimes have is that research, in the case of JAMA ophthalmology, they may receive some sort of letter to the editor in response to this paper. And usually what that's going to amount to is people will opine about their opinions, very oftentimes just opine about why they believe observational studies can't be trusted or what might be done. But I think that there's a different paradigm that needs to exist. When a study comes out with a potentially important and impactful finding, and the question becomes more research is needed, I believe that there needs to be a mechanism for the community at large to be able to do the research that's needed to get to a definitive answer so that we can address the question. In this particular case, is this drug that millions of people using around the world, does it actually cause some rare form of blindness or does it not? And I'm agnostic to the specific question, but it seems very important to me that an important answer to this question needs to be able to be addressed. And yet, if it typically, like JAMA ophthalmology, gives you about 30 days to send in a letter to the editor and a response to a paper like this, if on July 3rd, the paper came out, that means we got till August 3rd to actually stage a response. And while I'm extremely excited about all the progress that our community and our work groups are making, and particularly thrilled about the active leadership we have in our eye care and vision research work group, the practical reality is we're still not really well equipped right now to be able to take this question on July 3rd and turn it around into an analysis that we can find the data sources in our network and run a study so that we can give back reliable results to the world prior to August 3rd. But I think that the only reason that that's actually a problem is because we don't yet have an OHDSI Evidence Network. If on July 3rd, when several folks had read this paper, and many of you on this call were some of the people who had sent me the paper and said, hey, what do you think about this? If we had, instead of just idly talking and gossiping about it, had said, what does the OHDSI Evidence Network have to say about this? Which data sources should we be reaching out to? Which partner organizations look like they have the necessary information? We could be acting on this study right now. And because all we need to be able to run a strategy study is a target cohort, a comparator cohort, an indication cohort, an outcome cohort, well, Mark Suchard and the team has led our Legend type 2 diabetes studies. Guess what? We already have a target cohort. We already have a comparator cohort. We already have an indication cohort. And so basically the work associated with doing this study is phenotype the outcome, run our standardized tools across a data network that's ready to participate, generate results, and disseminate that evidence. Now, I believe that we are not technically far away from having the capacity to be able to do that. If forced to, we can produce a strategist package with the right phenotypes and can execute that across a network of data in a matter of a couple days. So the problem that we're facing is not a scientific or a technical one. It's purely a socio-political one, which is how do we get all of you who have access to data to be willing to do a minimal step to raise your hand to be part of the OHDSI Evidence Network so that you're ready when these opportunities arise to be able to jump in and participate. So what do we need for the OHDSI Evidence Network to be successful? I'm going to try to I'm going to, at a risk of oversimplifying it, I'm going to describe this very simply and Claire and Paul are going to go through more details in 2 weeks. But very simply, what we need is we need a list of data sources in partner organizations who have standardized their data, the OMOP Common Data Model, and are willing to consider participating in future network studies. That does not mean you're obligated. It doesn't mean you have to do it. It doesn't mean that you're on the hook or signing a contract to do anything. It just means you'd like to be in the game. You'd like to be part of the communications. You'd like to be able to talk about how to do this kind of work. So for each of those sources that we just have this list for, we need to capture a very minimum set of necessary information. And the reason is not because we're trying to scrounge a bunch of unnecessary pieces of information, but there's 3 things we need to do. 1, we need to enable network-aware design of phenotypes and analyses. If I don't know about what data exists in what data sources, I can't possibly plan to conduct a network study without that information. 2, we need to be able to conduct efficient preliminary fitness for use assessments. The work that Claire demonstrated with data diagnostics is a good demonstration of how when Cindy had her question, we had 34 viable data partners. Only about a third of them actually had the necessary information. We didn't need to bother everybody for Cindy's study. We only actually needed to reach out to the subset that would have. And last, but potentially most challenging from a sociopolitical perspective, is we need to have the mechanism to connect to the community and facilitate collaborations, to allow researchers to have the ability to talk to data partners when we have the appropriate research question properly specified, appropriately evaluated, so that we can really work together as a community. Now, the proposed starting point that that Claire has highlighted for us, I'm going to again oversimplify to make this very simple, make it straightforward to think through. What we are asking for all of you who have data is we want you to tell us your data source and your partner organization contact details. We want you to provide a very minimum set of extrinsic metadata. This is things we can't learn from your data, but we need to know, such as your population entry criteria. Is your data source coming from a geography or because of a health plan or because of patients having a visit encounter or because you're a disease registry? We want to know something about your care context. Do you have primary care data, secondary care, some mix of that? And we want basic information about your data provenance. So, do you have data from EHRs, claims, registries, patient-reported surveys, and the like? We're then asking you to run a piece of code that can produce intrinsic metadata, which very simplistically is just population demographics and concept record counts. And so with this information, we are able to meet the minimum needs that we have to be able to facilitate the design of studies, conduct feasibility assessments, and connect the community. Claire and Paul are going to talk about this at length, about explicitly how to do this, how to run the code, how to share the results, how to get IRB approval. I see the conversation about how do you get access to data with your IRB approval. Claire has already provided a protocol so that those of you who would like to get IRB approval can start that process. And I encourage those of you to do that in terms of where we are here. This QR code, which also maybe I'll ask Claire just to paste the link of the Google Forms, just allows you to express your interest in wanting to get a copy of this protocol to be able to participate. Christoph asked the question about many organizations have the same data sets. Yes, we are still interested in having multiple groups be part of the OHDSI Evidence Network, even if they license the same data set, because this is both a combination of what's the data source, but also who are the partner organizations that can participate. And the more organizations that we have that have access to data source, the more likelihood that somebody will have the time and availability and interest to engage and participate in that research. And so would encourage all of you who have access to data, even if you think, yeah, somebody else also has access to data, to be able to participate and be a representative of the OHDSI Evidence Network. Oh, shit. Okay, I've gone way too slow, so I apologize for that. But I want to show, in 5 minutes, I'm going to try to give you an argument of what's in it for you as an organization with data. So if you can provide this minimum viable aggregate information, there's 3 things that we will commit to figuring out a way as a community to deliver. The first is source benchmark reporting. One of the things that we've actually learned that's tremendously valuable is with the minimum set of information about a given source of information, basically just what's the record count of all of their concepts, we can actually learn a lot about a given data source, about how that data source is situated in relation to other data sources. Just to provide a super simple example of that, too slow, but I'll do this anyway. Just as a demonstration of this, I've created within J&J, we have access to 16 different data sources. And so we created our own little evidence network of only our data sources to be able to demonstrate what we want to be able to do across OHDSI. There are 16 different data sources. This is the number of concepts from the standardized vocabulary that exist in this number of sources. It turns out that even though we have over about 500,000 standard concepts across our internal J&J data network, only 990 of those concepts exist in all 16 data sources. And this is work that Anna actually had published earlier from her concept prevalence study that showcased that actually a majority of concepts are unique to a given organization. But what we can report back if you contribute your counts is that we will not just report back the aggregate of what does the whole network look like, but we'll also tell you for your given source, how do you stack up? In this particular case, I chose to look at one of the data sources that we have access to, JMDC, which is a Japanese claims data that I don't actually have much intuition about. And so I can actually learn that there's 20,000 codes in JMDC that nobody else has across our internal network. And I can also learn that there's 50 codes that everybody has except for JMDC. Not only can we summarize and aggregate this, but we can provide back exactly what are those concepts that exist only in a given data source. So I can see, for example, that there were 45 million concepts records in JMDC for urea nitrogen measurement on this SNOMED concept. And yet that's a concept that is only used in JMDC, nowhere else. And I can also look to see what are the concepts that everybody else in the world has except for JMDC. And I can see, for example, here, gout. We've got 100 million records of gout across the internal J&J network, but for whatever reason, JMDC does not have gout. We believe that providing this benchmarking back to sites, those of you who participate, will provide you a good reference to be able to understand your data better. The other thing that we are able to do is using the OHDSI phenotype library, we can actually assess which phenotypes are potentially viable and which phenotypes you don't appear to have record counts for. So Gautam helped with extracting out all of our phenotypes that we have from the OHDSI phenotype library. And in this particular case, just by having record counts, I can see which of the concepts look like I probably could study them in JMDC. So I've got lots of records of allergic rhinitis. But if I scroll to the bottom of our list of over 500 phenotypes in the OHDSI phenotype library, I can see lots of conditions for which currently I have no record counts that would support the study of these individual questions like non-small cell lung cancer, no record counts. This can immediately provide you the understanding of which questions are viable, which phenotypes are possible, could either help you in terms of improving your ETL, or as a researcher, just help you to think about which questions you might be able to answer. The second thing we're going to do with this information is we are going to aggregate the resources for the community. I'm way too short on time, so I'm going to actually, I'll bring this spreadsheet back very briefly. Simply by summarizing our network as a whole, we can understand for every medical concept how many data sources have a particular given concept. So here we go, hypertension. 16 sources have that, representing 4 billion records, as well as the descendant record counts associated with that. All of this is information that we can use when we are building phenotypes in Atlas. For example, those of you who use the Atlas demo site may have seen that you can actually use concept prevalent counts. Those who participate in the network will receive a file that you can put in your own Atlas instance so that you'll be able to build phenotypes being aware of the totality of the OHDSI network. We can also aggregate this information to understand source codes, to understand which source codes are used by the community the most, and this information will drive how our vocabulary team guides and prioritizes its work. If there's a concept that has lots of record counts and is used in lots of sources, then it means we should put lots of attention to making sure that we've mapped that source code correctly. If, however, there's only a handful of records in only one source, that probably doesn't take nearly as much priority. If you're worried about why isn't your source vocabularies getting the appropriate time and attention in the OHDSI vocabulary, you can 100% blame me, because I'm directing the vocabulary team to prioritize their efforts based on those sources that are contributing to the OHDSI Evidence Network, because these are the sources that are going to be used to meet our mission of collaboratively generating evidence to promote better health decisions and better care. The last thing that I'll say to reinforce this is this all started with this idea that we could do data diagnostics to identify sites that are fit for use. Claire and Paul will talk more about this in 2 weeks. I think the current reality is we still need collaboration from all of you to understand how to get you to participate and how you'll be willing to share information such as like contact details with other collaborators. But ultimately, what we've now proven over time and time again is that if we can connect the right people with the right questions to the right data, we can generate reliable evidence that can meaningfully improve care. I think that the semaglutide case that just came up this week is yet another example of where there could be an OHDSI call to action. But I think that more broadly, this needs to just become the new way of working for our community. And so this is why we're going to be spending the next 2 months really trying to promote this idea of participating in the OHDSI Evidence Network. And I encourage all of you to participate. And if you have any questions, feel perceptions of barriers or challenges, this is the time for us to express it so that we can turn our 34 data partners who initially participated into a true list of 534 data partners that we can use as data to answer questions around the world. I apologize, Craig, for going 2 minutes over, but I hope that that was helpful to motivate folks, and I will answer the questions in the chat as we go here.